Yo, what up? This is Josh Rubin from East West Healing and Performance, and today I'm back from Canada. A little bit fatigued today, but I want to get a YouTube up and talk about scoliosis. Now, I'm not going to go into depth on the different types. Of course, it can really come from anywhere, and if you watch a lot of my YouTubes, talking about the occiput, the bones of the face, bones of the cranium, the base, the vault, the different fascial connections, all these different things in the body, the spine, the organs, all these things can cause scoliosis. And I think the thing is, when we're working with people with scoliosis, we need to look at the person that's in front of us and say, why does this person, based on my assessment, have scoliosis? Is it a muscular issue? Is it a fascial issue? Is it a ligamentous issue? Is it a visceral issue? Is it coming from that area of the spine that is scoliotic? Is it coming from a weakness in that area? Is it coming from a tightness? Is it coming from above that's causing the scoliosis? Is it coming from below, the feet, the knees, the pelvis, etc.? Ligaments, muscles, fascia, that are or bone even, that are causing this issue. So we have to think about that. What I want to talk about is something basic, I guess. It's basic to me, might not be to you. But I want to talk about the sacrum. And I want to correlate it according to Fryettes' laws. Fryette is spelled F-R-Y-E-T-T-S, Fryettes' law. And there's three different laws. I'm only going to really talk about one. And the first law is S doesn't equal R. And this is the lumbar spine. And we could say it actually happens in the sacrum too, because the sacrum dictates a lot of what's happening in the lumbar spine. According to my philosophy and what I've learned, the lumbar spine and the cervical spine are actually adaptive parts of the spine. So unless there's trauma, if you find lesions and issues in those parts of the spine, a lot of the times you'll actually find different parts of the body above and below causing those adaptations and dysfunctions. And if you regulate those areas, you'll actually regulate what's going on in those parts of the spine. So S does not equal R, meaning side bend does not equal rotation. So if you side bend, let's say left in the lumbar spine, you're automatically going to rotate right. So this happens, it doesn't equal each other. You side bend left, you rotate right. You side bend right, you rotate left. Same thing happens in the sacrum, only on the physiological oblique axes of the sacrum, the left and right oblique axes. And there's many axes, but I'm talking about the physiological oblique axes because there are non-physiological oblique axis issues. Typically in a neutral position in the spine, with no flexion or extension in that neutral position, you have weight that's actually evenly distributed on the facets and the discs. And this is the first law of Fryettes. And this is actually happening in gravity. And of course, the second law is when S equals R, and we don't have that equal distribution, and we're already in flexion and extension. We're not in gravity, or we're not in neutral per se. Now you get S equals R because as the nucleus slides backwards during side bending, so if you side bend, the nucleus actually side bends back and actually causes the rotation to the opposite side. So a lot of it has to do with the movement, the muscles, but also the bone and also the nucleus. So this is normal physiology of the spine. Some people agree with this, some people don't. So you have S doesn't equal R. A lot of the times you have, it's in gravity. You're not starting in flexion or extension, you're in neutral. And it's the nucleus as you side bend that gets pushed back that causes the rotation and causes increased tension on the ligaments that causes rotation to the opposite side. Now, why am I talking about this? Because in the sacrum, you have two physiological oblique axes. Now, you have non-physiological lesions that can happen on these axes. And I've talked about this before in some of my YouTubes. But you have the right oblique axis going from the right base to the left ILA. And you have the left oblique axes, left base, to the right ILA. Now, those are your physiological axes when this kind of first law of Fryettes happens. And there's a point to this. So let's say you get movement along the left oblique axis. Now, the right piriformis maintains a left oblique axis, and the left piriformis maintains the right oblique axis. Now, this isn't to say that if you have an oblique axis issue in the sacrum, that all you have to do is regulate the psoas, and the person is going to be good to go. Because as I talked about, there's many things like certain ligaments, the sacroiliac ligaments, the sacrotuberous ligaments, the iliosacral ligaments. You have the uterosacral ligament that attaches to S2. You have other AP and vertical axes. You have myofascial connections, etc. that can easily affect the sacrum, above and below. Things in the cranium that can affect the sacrum, and I've talked about this at length in many of my YouTubes. So if we have a left torsion on the left oblique axis, essentially you get this movement. It's not this. That actually would be a non-physiological lesion or on the central vertical axis if it rotates. And a lot of times that's more of a dural, myofascial, visceral issue. But you get this kind of movement. What happens is this base actually moves anterior-inferior. This ILA moves posterior and inferior. On the right oblique axis, this base moves anterior-inferior, and the right ILA moves posterior-inferior. And the difference between the physiological and non-physiological, so if we got a right rotation on the left axis, this base is actually moving posterior and superior, and this ILA is actually moving anterior and superior. And the same on the non-physiological right oblique axis when it rotates left, and it shouldn't. That's why it's non-physiological. So my point in this is, if you're following me so far, let's say, and this actually happens in gait, that's why these movements are physiological. So when you're kind of in a heel-toe stance position like this, right leg forward, left leg back, you're actually moving on the left oblique axis. Now there's other functional movements along different axes in gait, but I don't want to go into those. So this is why they're called physiological, because in movement we move along the left and right oblique axes in a physiological movement. You lose the left oblique axis, the sacrum rotates left, use the right, it rotates right, etc. So anytime the sacrum moves along the left oblique axis, let's pick that one. This is the axis, this base is moving anterior and inferior, this is moving posterior and inferior. You actually have a right side bending. So you actually have a slight right side bending and a left rotation. Now, according to Fryettes' law in this physiological lesion, the lumbar spine in gravity is going to side bend left, rotate right. Now, what can happen with that? And of course, there's many other issues besides bone that are causing this, as I've talked about. There's many, things visceral, like I've talked about. The uterus attaches through the uteral sacral ligament to S2 of the sacrum. There's many other issues with the coccyx, ligaments, fascia, etc. that can cause this in the pelvic area as well as above and below. So we get a left side bending right rotation, and other parts of the spine are going to compensate, giving you that false kind of functional scoliosis. And everyone's going to treat the scoliosis by releasing the psoas, releasing the iliocostalus, the rectus spinae, etc. But the sacrum dictates what's happening in the lumbar spine. So what if you find it's a visceral issue, an osseous issue, a ligamentous issue? You actually work on the things that are causing the sacral torsion, or you work on the sacrum itself to actually get it to regulate. Indirectly, you'll actually get a result in the lumbar spine without even touching the lumbar spine. Same thing with your non-physiological lesions, which happen in flexion extension, so they happen out of gravity. You don't have a normal weight distribution. And a lot of the times, the nucleus is already positioned anterior or posterior. So as you rotate, it's actually going to pull the vertebrae to the same side in the lumbar spine. So if you have, let's say, a non-physiological lesion of the sacrum on the left oblique axis, you're going to get a left side bending and a right rotation. The lumbar spine is actually going to left side bend and left rotate to compensate for that. In flexion, anti-flexion, of course, causing tons of ligamentous issues in the iliolumbar ligaments, psoas on the left side, restricting right side bending and left rotation. You're going to get issues in the viscera, torsions, etc., etc. So a lot of the times, if you're seeing that dysfunction, of course, the other parts of the spine are actually going to compensate. So if you're seeing those dysfunctions, what if you find locally you work on the areas of the pelvic basin that are causing sacral issues? Indirectly, you might affect the spine. What if you work on the sacrum itself, the ligaments, the muscles, the fascia, the bone itself, to regulate it back to neutral, getting this base to go posterior? Or if it's non-physiological, getting this base to move anterior. You can actually indirectly affect the lumbar spine and eliminate the scoliosis. Now, I'm not saying you don't always have to, you can ignore it and not work on it. Sometimes you actually have to go there. But that's not where the primary issue is coming from. And I'm putting this up because, based on my old philosophies and what I see people coming to me, most people that have scoliosis, everyone's ignoring the feet. Everyone's ignoring the knees. Everyone's ignoring the pelvis. You have to think about the innominate bones. If the innominate bone is anterior on the right, of course, you're going to have a right rotation of the sacrum. It can actually be an anterior torsion of the pelvis and this is actually relative to the pelvis, and it's actually a neutral. Or you can actually have a right torsion physiological or a right torsion non-physiological, giving you the illusion that the right innominate is the anterior, but it's really coming from the sacrum. And there's a lot of tests that you can do to figure out, is it the ilium or the sacrum that's actually torsioned? So I guess my point to doing this is to wake you up, give you some new school of thought to understand that if you find scoliosis, a lot of the times it's not coming from the spine. It can, but a lot of the times it's coming from the sacrum, things that attach, cross, that actually have an effect on the sacrum that are coming from above and below. As I've talked about in many of my YouTubes, with the cranium, different fascial connections, the base of the occiput, the vault, the feet, the bones in the feet, etc. So hopefully you've enjoyed this YouTube. I'm out of here.